The Canadian Real Estate Association just revised their 2024 housing forecast up, and now they're expecting housing prices to increase by almost 5% this year. And at the same time, new housing starts are down, and the federal government just came out and said we need another 1.3 million homes by 2030 in order to catch up with supply, which is significantly lower than the estimates put out by CMHC last year. And this has many wondering exactly what is going on with the Canadian real estate market, and is this housing crisis just getting worse? And yes, it very much appears that it is. But before we get into it, my name is Nolan Matthias, and if you want the latest Canadian real estate news, this is the place for you. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and hit the like button so more people like you can see this video. And if you're looking down and you're seeing, hey, it looks like I'm not subscribed to Nolan's channel, but I swear I subscribed here previously. Well, that's because there are now two channels. This one that is focused on Canadian real estate, and the other one, the bigger one, which is now focused on more general financial topics. So make sure that you're subscribed to both, and especially make sure you're subscribed to this one if the Canadian real estate information is what you're looking for. Okay, so let's get into it. Lots going on in the Canadian real estate market right now, and a lot of it doesn't appear to be the best news. Well, I guess it depends on which side of the scenario you're on. Because if you already own a home, well, values are going up and it looks like you're gaining more equity. But if you're one of those people who hasn't been able to get into the market yet, it appears that things could be getting worse. So I want to start by jumping in and taking a look at the headlines as we like to do. And we're going to start with this one. Home prices expected to climb 4.9% in 2024 as sales rise last month. This is according to CREA. And this is no surprise. Housing prices continue to go up, but what is a surprise is that the forecast has been increased because at the beginning of 2024, CREA didn't see home prices going up as much as they're now forecasting them to go up. And that is largely due to an increase in the number of sales, as well as, many other things that are going on in the economy right now, especially the record population growth that just doesn't seem to want to quit. And the revised forecast came as CREA reported the number of home sales in March rose 1.7% compared with a year ago. The average price of a home sold last month amounted to $698,530, up 2% from March of 2023. And not only are more people jumping into the market, but many are doing it because they expect that interest rates are going to go down, which ironically is the thing that could make interest rates not actually go down, especially if everyone starts acting as if inflation is under control and we can go on a buying spree again and act like it's 2020. It used to be, I want to party like it's 1999. Well, now it appears that as the expectation of lower rates is coming down the road, people are starting to think that they can party like it's 2020 all over again and jump back into the housing market. And while interest rates is playing a role in this, some are also jumping into the housing market because it's becoming clear that the supply needed in order to house all of the new Canadians and the ones that are already here is not catching up to what it needs to be. In fact, according to CMHC, housing starts were down 7% in March from February. Now, one thing to note here is that this is a month-over-month statistic. So in other words, numbers were lower in March than they were in February. However, compared to last year, housing starts were actually up 19%. And this is largely driven by the huge increase in multi-family, multi-unit starts. So in other words, the incentives that the government are putting into place in order to encourage multi-family building is actually helping the housing supply. But the question is, will it be enough? The Parliamentary Budget Officer just put out a report that Canada needs to build 1.3 additional homes by 2030 to close the housing gap. Now, this is interesting because just last year, CMHC came out and said we need almost 3.5 million homes in order to close the gap by 2030, and that we were not anywhere close to on pace in order to build the homes that were needed. And even by the lower estimate, the PBO estimate, we need an additional 181,000 more homes than we are currently building in order to catch up the lower PBO estimate. But the question is, why is there such a gap between the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report and CMHC's report, which suggested we needed an extra 3.5 million homes? Well, that is because when CMHC looked at these numbers, they looked at it from the perspective of what we would need to do to return affordability back to 2003 and 2004 levels. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, on the other hand, well, he was simply looking to close the gap between supply and demand. So in other words, the extra 1.3 million homes that he is suggesting need to be built would purely just close the gap in supply and demand, which means he would expect housing prices to pretty much remain the same as what they are now, which is far too high. And we've seen all kinds of reports on this, especially the ones coming from RBC that are suggesting that the affordability in Canada is at all-time lows. So the PBO putting out these numbers is really just suggesting that home prices are okay right now and not paying attention to the fact that they are significantly less affordable than they were in 2003 and 2004. Now, on top of that, we have more problems coming down the road because Trudeau's housing gambit, yes, his famous "we're going to make housing affordable" thing, well, that has businesses worried about tax hikes. And if you have been living under a stone, what you probably haven't realized or haven't heard about yet is that Trudeau just recently increased the capital gains taxes for both corporations and individuals, exposing now 2/3 of all capital gains to taxes, at least when it is in excess of $250,000 if you're an individual. If you want to learn more about that, because I know that's complicated, you can go and check it out. Just Google it online. But the reality here is that Trudeau is making it more expensive for businesses and high net worth individuals to operate in Canada. And here's the problem with that. He's trying to tax the capital gains in order to fund housing. And the problem with taxing capital gains in order to fund housing is it encourages those companies and those individuals who may invest in productivity in the country to move their money elsewhere. And of course, I don't need to explain how that is problematic for housing, especially when you look at home builders and people specifically in the real estate industry who may take their money and go elsewhere. So the very thing that is making it possible for companies to pay individuals, which allows individuals to pay for their mortgages and buy housing, is being targeted by Trudeau, which is going to make this whole mess worse. Winston Churchill once said something to the effect of, if you try to tax yourself out of a recession or a financial problem, it's essentially like standing in a bucket and trying to lift it. And that is exactly what's happening here. The government is now suggesting that they're going to tax us more, and they're hoping that they can take those taxes, redistribute it, and make the problem that they very much created better. Now, on top of that, they're making it worse by reintroducing 30-year amortizations, encouraging first-time homebuyers to go and buy homes from builders who obviously don't have the best interests of those first-time homebuyers at heart. And they're just creating a massive debt mess that gets worse and worse every single time Trudeau stands in front of a mic and opens his mouth. And if that's not enough, the amount of pushback on the 2024 budget has been insane. David Dodge, former Bank of Canada governor, has come out and said that this is going to hurt people, not just everybody, but young people. Bill Morneau, the former finance minister, has also come out and said that this is a bad budget. It is bad for everybody. And the National Bank CEO is the most recent to come out and slam the capital gains tax increase, which has a whole bunch of potential issues when it comes to productivity in the country. And if you are going to set up a situation where people can no longer afford to buy houses, does it really matter if you're building those houses? Because you are taking away the thing that allows them to buy, save, and afford those homes, which is their income. And if the companies don't have it to pay the employees, or even worse, if the companies just pick up and leave because Canada is no longer competitive on a global scale, well, that means less jobs. That means less income for Canadians. Probably means that some Canadians are going to start leaving the country. And therefore, we're actually going to end up fixing our housing problem by making it so nobody wants to live here. It is absolute insanity. And if all of that was not enough, the asking rent prices in March were up 8.8% from a year ago, which means not only is it getting more expensive to own a home, but it's getting more expensive to rent a home, and none of this is getting better. And while I'm typically pretty apolitical, I think that this whole mess is just getting made worse and worse by a group of government individuals that just have no idea what they're doing, especially when it comes to the economy. I mean, to have a prime minister who says, I don't really pay attention to monetary policy, and then shows that he really doesn't pay attention to not only monetary policy, but fiscal policy and how that can affect the economics of both young individuals, older individuals, and the economy as a whole, should say enough to Canadians that it's time for a change. And it really is time for a change. And I'm going to admit that I was not the biggest fan of Pierre Poilievre in the beginning. I thought he was a little bit too far right, a little bit too crazy when it came to the things he was saying. But now, as he talks more and more about common sense and common sense decisions for Canadians, I'm really starting to believe that he might be not the answer, but a better answer than the government that we have. So, lots of crazy things happening in the Canadian real estate market. I don't think there's ever a perfect time to buy a home, but what I can tell you is that it looks like, at least for the short term to medium term, housing prices are going to continue to go up, which means if you aren't in the market and you can afford to get into the market, it might be a good time to dip your toes into it just so that you can get on the property ladder and make sure that you aren't trying to catch up 10, 20, or 30 years from now. And by the way, if you're buying a house expecting interest rates to go down or hoping that interest rates go down in order to be able to afford that home, I'm going to suggest that you look at it from a different perspective and instead try to buy a home that you can afford even if interest rates go up. Oh, and if you want to see more on what's happening with interest rates, make sure you check out this video right here.